It is Thursday, the 15th of the 1st, 2026. The time is 37 past 10, and that means, as always, that there are a multitude of F1-centric threads at which we need to know must pull. We'll talk about Maximilian Verstappen and an exit clause per build. So too, we'll talk about Mercedes and their durable competitive advantage. We'll talk about Fernando El Plan Alonso and Aston Martin, because divergent is what opinion is on them. Peter Windsor, friend of the channel, the goatiest of all goats, has come out and said that Alonso could potentially win himself a race and or championships next year. So too, Jake Humphries, something similar. But the rumour, the word on the F1 curb is that Aston Martin are struggling across all different departments. So too, we'll talk about Scuderia Ferrari, who aren't necessarily strangers to struggle. In the first instance, though, we're T-minus 24 hours away from our first livery launch. Lest we forget, for context, it is a livery launch. Don't think that what you see from Red Bull in less than 24 hours time at Detroit in their reveal will be the car that you will see on track in a couple days time at the private test when photos start leaking. And that's a conversation in and of itself, right? First, why is the test private? Because F1 are numpties and they fail to understand that you need to act upon all of this shenanigans, all of the modus operandi that Liam Parker said, that everything is content. If you want to be iShow Speed or Kaiser, then you need to open up the doors, warts and all F1, but this is F1. And again, its MO's always been, we will take all of your money, but you guys stay over there, privatise the profits, socialise the F1 losses. And I don't think this is a good thing. But again, I suppose F1 teams are incentivised to keep their design philosophy powder dry, are they not? Lest they want other teams to steal from them. Oh, and by the way, there's been a groundswell of support for Fernando El Pan Alonso and Aston Martin. You will recall the odds for Fernando Alonso, 18 to 1 a couple of weeks ago. Therefore, you bet £1 and get 18 back. Walk away with a total of 19 Great British pounds. However, you'll struggle to get 12s now. A lot of money, potentially in the know, potentially not in the know, has come in for Fernando Alonso as far as his chances of winning the World Drivers' Championship. I tell you what's techie here. Sometimes F1 doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. History, of course, I'm talking about. You remember going into 2022, there was a lot of chatter about this green machine. Dan Fallows had not long left the parish that is the Bulls that are red and joined Aston Martin. People were saying that he designed himself, therefore, a god tier RB21 knockoff. That the Aston Martin then was going to be brilliant, a race leader. Dan Fallows is a genius. What happened then with Aston Martin? What happened then? They shined ever so brightly for a couple of races, but dropped off as far as the development race over the course of that year. However, far from it to be me to disagree respectfully with the legend that is Peter D. Windsor, because he thinks, per his latest stream, that Fernando Alonso might be in with a shot at the championship per all of that money that's come in on him. Roll the clip.
George definitely will be up there. I think Kimi will probably win a race. Kimi Antonelli, that is. George potentially the championship. Fernando potentially the championship. And McLaren will therefore have a more difficult chance of winning a championship, but for sure they'll win races, with probably Oscar having a slight advantage over Lando this year, I think. George.
Oh, the humanity. Peter D. Windsor predicts that George will win races and potentially therefore championships. So too Fernando Alonso. But that prediction is predicated on Aston Martin having a car, right? Look, Jake Humphries, infinitely more connected to the space and the sport than I or you or me. He said very recently, 1 month ago with Jacques Villeneuve on the High Performance podcast, that he thinks so too. Fernando Alonso has a decent shot at winning himself some championship silverware. Roll the clip, Cameron.
Well,
Jake Humphrey is saying that the word on the F1 curb is that Aston Martin data in the wind tunnel is god tier. I mean, it contradicts. This is where you got to put your F1 investigative cap on, right? All F1 journals are created equally and reports therefore, but some are created more equal than others. This is techie. Aston Martin, some say, not least of whom is Adrian Newey, that their wind tunnel's not even been great. 50 million has just come online, but the data coming out of there, again, lacks... there's a gap between it and reality. Some say, look, let me show you this, because again, you've got to put on your F1 investigative cap, because so many different people are saying too many different things. There is bad news out there for Aston Martin, per Aston Martin F1 Insights on Twitter, that they're behind as far as logistics. Their critical path analysis is struggling. The simulation tools have been weak, and they've had to recalibrate the lot over the course of the summer. That the team is now signalled that they expect a truly challenging 2027. We understand that just like Red Bull, Ford, they're going to need to develop their way to a championship. Some say it's techie over there at Aston Martin. Let me tell you why. It's important. This is me not pouring water on the Fernando El Plan Alonso flame. However, I've submitted already the pros. Here are the Aston Martin cons. You understand that 2027 is a brand new rule and reg spec. Of course, 50% electric, 50% ice, meaning therefore per Pablo Elizalde that there will be lap time and therefore advantage to be gained out of design philosophy synchronicity. What you can't do is what the W13 did by dint of Mercedes in 2022 and design your chassis over here and your suspension over here and your aero over here. This needs to be a consolidated project. Aston Martin are having as their PU provider Honda, and where are Honda based? Honda have already said that they're struggling. Koji Watanabe, who heads up that program, says it's not quite fatal yet, but nearly, as near as makes no difference. They are struggling. They lack, therefore, for design synchronicity. 2015 GP2 engine, that's the rumour that they are overweight and underpowered. Andy Cowell, not long, TP of Aston Martin, has been switched. His role redefined. Now he's in charge of all the power unit stuff alongside Honda, hand holding them because they are worried. I think they'll struggle. Honda are famous, by the way, for agile thinking, right? Six Sigma, a cheeky design philosophy loophole, tax avoidance per se. So why didn't they realise, per Mercedes and Red Bull Ford to a lesser extent, that there was advantage in compression ratios? Why didn't they know this, if indeed you are as god tier, goated as Honda? Because I think they're 2015 Honda, not 2021 Red Bull Honda. I think that's what we're looking at here. Brand new rule and reg spec. They're going to take time to play their way into the 2027 crease. Oh, and by the way, you know who did spot the compression ratio loophole? Mercedes, chat. And they've taken advantage of it big time. Here's the bad news. Mercedes have taken advantage, all of the advantage as far as this compression ratio. Let me tell you why this is important. Because Aston Martin in the first instance, who not long had a partnership with Mercedes, will be looking over there at the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth and thinking, why did we sever that partnership? They're the goated ones. 2014 split turbo hybrid settings, length and breadth, tenure. This is expertise. This is F1. And by the way, Aston Martin might not be the only ones thinking that. Mention no names. Lewis Hamilton. Why didn't we stick with Mercedes? Here's where it gets techie. Because Pablo Elizalde and Mark Hughes have written some articles and they're talking about the need to leverage some additional developmental upgrade opportunities, that as at race 6, that the advantage between Mercedes power unit and the others, Scuderia, Ferrari, Red Bull, Ford as well, will be so material that potentially the FIA will have to get together. That's why on January the 22nd they're having a meeting to discuss this. What they can't have is George Russell, as of race 6 in 2027, a gazillion points down the road in the drivers' standings, because in all likelihood that's what's going to happen. That's the eventuality, the circumstance at which we're looking. Mark Hughes writes a couple of different things. It looks like it might be needed, this ADUO, additional development upgrade opportunities. Again, this is FIA fixing for the levelling of the competitive landscape. They might need to. So extensive is the advantage that Mercedes have on the rest of the power unit providers. Mark Hughes writes the following. This ADUO stuff, as of race 6, looks like it might need to be leveraged if what we're hearing on the Mercedes advantage, apparently gained through increasing compression ratios beyond the regulatory limit of 16:1, then in operation is true. After every 5 to 6 races, depending upon how the calendar falls, any power unit manufacturer found to be struggling can be granted per the FIA a combination of benefits. Here's the problem though, chat. Let me be honest with you. Now, let me cite Natchez, who by the way is winning F1 Twitter in the off season. The alleged Mercedes 2026 engine trick could be immense. We need to look beyond the 15 brake horsepower that's been talked about. If the thermal engine is ultra efficient, you can use the extra fuel to generate electricity and keep the battery always at 100%. Do you remember we talked about design synchronicity, being holistic in your approach? And it sounds like that's what Mercedes have done. Ron Dennis told you a gazillion years ago that customer teams cannot win anything. There is an advantage that comes from holding the PU whip hand because you can design everything else around your PU design. Gearbox sexiness, aero sexiness as far as the wing beam, or if the wing beam is even a thing in 2027. You can be holistic in your approach and your POV. Oh, and by the way, if as is per the rumour, these other teams have got it so badly wrong that they've missed out on the big thing, the exam question. There is compression ratios. How long do you think it's going to take for them to redesign their PU? This isn't a toggle proof thing. You can't just go away and do this. This isn't a Happy Meal toy that you just get out the box. It isn't a quick thing to go and redesign your PU and therefore the rest of your car around it. Again, can you say holistic? Can you spell design, philosophy, synchronicity? Mark Hughes continues, the engine challenges for 2027 are pretty extreme as you get up to the sort of super high compression ratios of the previous generation of power units, whereby the maximum was set at 18:1. The piston moves further up the cylinder head, blah, 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 blah. I'm telling you, I don't think they're going to be able to re-engineer this stuff, and they won't be able to re-engineer their car more holistically for any power unit modification advantage. Oh, and by the way, if you think that's techie, Ferrari, listen, this is where it gets techie than techie things. Frederick Vasseur has lost his mind most recently because, again, they're behind the logistical 8-ball, behind time. There, it's said that Ferrari are one of a couple teams, mention no names, Alpine potentially and Red Bull Ford, who are going to turn up late to the first private test in a few days' time. What are we doing here? Frederick Vasseur, when realising that they're so behind our Ferrari in terms of logistics, against the backdrop of him potentially losing his job over the first 5 races if he doesn't turn this red ship with a yellow badge and the black prancing horse ship around, lost his marbles. What are we doing? Scuderia Ferrari just Ferraring at this juncture, right? And again, what makes it worse is that as far as compression ratios, which of course, apparently, if word on the F1 curb is to be believed, is the battleground upon which the Drivers' Championship will be fought in 2027, that there are some teams, not named Mercedes, who know something about that. Red Bull, Ford know a little bit, but not a lot, that their rate of development, that they've failed to expedite for their learning curve, but they are infinitely further down the road as far as leveraging the cheeky compression ratio loophole as versus a Ferrari, let's say. So you have Mercedes who have nailed it, Red Bull, Ford just a little bit below, and then the rest, Scuderia Ferrari, nowhere, Honda, nowhere. And this in 2027, they say, is a power unit championship. Oh, and by the way, Maximilian Verstappen, we've got to talk about this because Max gave an interview not long ago. And again, this is one of those ones that you got to put your F1 investigative hat on for. Not long. Max Verstappen gave an interview with Blick where he talked about Oscar Piastri. You think I'm going to be subjected to team orders, papaya rules without good reason? No. To do that, you would have to, that would be to sell your racing soul, said Max Verstappen. But he expounded. He was asked about his future at Red Bull and he said the exam answer always that I've got a contract through to 2028. That the Bulls that are red is a family and I am loyal to it, as you would expect Max Verstappen to say. He's not going to say anything else at this juncture. However, you know, you've passed his prologue that Max Verstappen and Team Verstappen have always seen Max as a gun for hire. What they don't want to do is sit there on 4 championships and have Max Verstappen's career fail at the hurdle that he's having a commensurate car, a car capable, that's championship ready. 4 championships. If Max were to retire today, people would talk about potential would they not? And Max doesn't want that. He wants to be sat there right alongside, if not past, Lewis on 7 and Juan Manuel Fangio also on 7. He wants to be up in the 8s and 9s as his talent so demands. However, to do that, Jos Verstappen and Vermeulen have always been a bit techie, mercurial as far as the stipulations in Max Verstappen's contract. You will know last year there was a stipulation in Max's contract. However, it stated outside of the top 3 at the summer's break, he was 3rd. Therefore, he couldn't null and void his contract. Had they put outside the top 2 Houston, we would have had a problem. Potentially, Max Verstappen would already be a Mercedes driver. The rumour going into 2027 per multiple sources was that that stipulation had been amended. No longer was it top 3, but it had been made more finite, more definitive. Top 2 was the rumour. However, Build report it's not top 2, it's top 1. Build claims, and I quote, that Max Verstappen has another exit clause in 2027, a tighter one. If he's not leading the World Drivers' Championship by the end of July 27, he can unilaterally terminate his contract with Red Bull Racing at the end of the year. Oh, the humanity. This talk of loyalty is going to be tested. I tell you what, that is a game changer. Project Mercedes and Max Verstappen is in full flow. Lest we forget, where there's a will, there is a way. And Toto, the boy who cried wolf, has never been shy about flirting outside of the relationship. The exact thing that he said that he wasn't going to do as far as Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time champion. Lest we forget that Toto, the boy who cried wolf, said it a gazillion times, but I will reiterate for the avoidance of doubt. Toto has made it clear by his behaviour that he will do nothing. He will stop at nothing to get the signature of one Maximilian Verstappen going into 2027. For then he has a royal flush. I would see you that and raise you this. Toto will drop kick in the chest one King George Russell or a Kimi Antonelli if it means getting a whiff of the signature of Max Verstappen, because he sees advantage in it. Royal flush settings, checkmate in 4 moves is going to get techie. T-minus 24 hours before we get an official Red Bull Racing livery launch, and I'm keen to see how that pans out between now and next time. What are we doing? Yeah.